Okay, we've reached the last week of class, and so this is going to be our last topic, interest groups and political participation. And if we think about, as long as there is a government, there will be interest trying to influence it. So during the 1890s, this is a cartoon satirizing the success that business interests had in fighting protective tariffs in Congress. Now, tariff is simply a tax, and they don't want to have their businesses taxed, so they were campaigning and using their businesses to influence Congress. And so that's just a characterization of that. All right, so we're going to have two lectures. One is on Part 1, the definition of what an interest group is and how would you differentiate that from a political party. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how theories of political science might help us understand how interest groups work. And then we're going to talk about the different functions and types of interest groups that exist. And then in Part 2, we'll talk more about how interest groups through the Political Action Committee, or PAC, tries to lobby Congress, and something called the Iron Triangle, where you have interests and the government working together to try and forge policy. And then we'll talk a little bit how it is that interest groups try to mobilize public opinion. And then, I don't have it on this slide, but I will on Part 2. We'll talk a little bit about voting and participation. All right. This is the cartoon focusing on the NRA, which is the National Rifle Association. And so I'm going to use this group as just one example of an interest group and show you some recent trends and how the NRA, for example, has increased its membership. So in terms of recent trends, if we think about interest groups, they have been important to American politics since the beginning. In fact, James Madison referred to interest groups as factions. They're also known as pressure groups or special interest groups. But the key is that they've really tried to influence policy. And there's a growing number of them that try to pressure government, and you can see how quickly they've grown over the last several decades. But this is just an example of NRA membership and how NRA membership has grown in response to some of the effects that the government has had to try and restrict gun purchasing. So in 1990, 2.5 million were members of the NRA. And then in 1994, you see that the Brady law, gun purchase restrictions actually begin. And so this is when we have an assault on, a ban on assault weapons. And this was a reaction that the NRA did a lot of advertising, and it pushed its membership up to 3.4 million. And so in 1995, the NRA was really trying to reverse this assault on the ban trying to reverse the ban on assault weapons. And then in 1999 you had the Columbine shootings, and then you have some new gun control proposals out of that particular event, and this led to another NRA ad campaign that increased voters to enroll in the NRA to about 4 million. And so you can see that certain events throughout history will mobilize people's interest in a particular issue, which might cause them to join an interest group. So if people believe that they have a Second Amendment right to own a particular weapon, and they feel that the government is starting to restrict that right, this might lead them to join the NRA. So a lot of times people join interest groups because they have some sort of latent interest in a particular issue, and it's not until the government starts to try to restrict those issues or somehow ignore those issues do they start to mobilize and try to influence government about a particular policy. All right, so after the Columbine shooting, public opinion solidly favored stricter gun control laws, and so the NRA spent $3 million to fight some of these bills, and gun control legislation did not pass. And so even though you might have a public that is scattered around the country that might be opposed to lax gun laws and want more strict gun laws, the NRA is a much more focused group who spends a lot of money trying to fight gun control bills, and they have a lot of influence on legislation. So the interest group collectively has a lot more influence and power than the average voter does who's not part of an interest group. All right. How might we define an interest group? Just like other definitions in political science, it's going to depend on who you ask. But let's define an interest group as an organized body of individuals who share some goals and who try to influence public policy. So it's an organized body of individuals. There's a common goal that these individuals have, and they want to influence public policy. And I've just put up a few examples here. The Sierra Club is an environmental group that's been around for a really long time. The Texas Farm Bureau, if you're from the state of Texas and you're from a farming community, you've probably seen this sign. Many agricultural interests are part of the Texas Farm Bureau. The AFL-CIO is an umbrella organization that is of labor, and so this is the largest union that is in the United States. So again, it's this idea that they're formal organizations that want to have some sort of common goal so that they can influence public policy. So how does an interest group differ from a political party? Because all of this sounds very similar to how we defined a political party last week. The one thing that you need to keep in mind so that you can differentiate the two is that a political party's ultimate goal is to win and contest elections in order to operate within government. And parties are broad-based. They have a broad base of coalitions. So if you think about the Democratic Party in the United States, there's lots of different groups that combine to make up the Democratic Party. So parties are broad-based coalitions whose stands on issues cover a wide range of issues. Interest groups, on the other hand, are very focused and have a limited set of policy positions, and they have a more narrow set of interests. And interest groups do not put candidates up for election. Parties do. Interest groups might support a candidate, but interest groups are not running candidates for political office. The political party does that. So there's really two things to keep in mind to differentiate these two. Interest groups don't run candidates for elections, and they're more narrowly focused. Political parties do contest elections and want to have someone win an election, and they're more broad-based. Okay, so keep those two things in mind. All right. Interest groups have a long history and tradition in American politics. And if you find governments or different political regimes out there that don't allow competing interests, you're probably not looking at a democracy. So democracies have a history of having different groups coalesce to form interest groups. Okay. So again, this is our definition of an interest group, a formal organization who share some common outlook or social circumstance or some other interest, and they band together because they want to influence public policy. Whereas a political party, its goal is to contest and win elections, and again, they're broad-based and cover a wide range of issues. All right. I want to say a few things about interest group theory. Okay. If we think about what the role of an interest group is today, think about how individuals participate in politics. What is the role of the individual? How do they participate? They tend to participate in the voting booth, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of next lecture, but the role of the individual in politics is basically through voting, and they vote a lot. We have a primary coming up at the end of May, then we'll go vote in November for the President of the United States as well as many other elected officials. We vote every 2 years for our House members and a third of our senators, and a lot of local elections as well. So the number one way that the individual participates is through voting. Interest group theory, on the other hand, suggests that as a group, people might have more of an influence when they are coalescing around a particular interest. Okay? And there are several different theories that tell us about how interest groups behave. There is David Truman and pluralism. And David Truman is simply a political scientist who was one of the first to write about interest group behavior and how come people form interest groups, and he bases his arguments on the idea of pluralism. Now, we've talked about pluralism before, and this is simply the idea that different groups have an interest, they bargain in the political arena, like in Congress, for example. They try to influence Congress people. And through pluralism, what you have is a bargaining and some sort of consensus or agreement to compromise in order to forge public opinion. So here it is, the idea that citizens connect to the government through interest groups and they compete in the public sphere. And so you will have different groups who form around a particular issue. So you have people who are pro-choice and you have people who are pro-life. They're in different interest groups. They compete in the public sphere through the voting process, through public awareness, through political action campaigns. And then the government produces some sort of compromise on that particular issue. So the results is a compromise and some moderate policy, so where each extreme view is moderated in some form or fashion. Okay. That tends to be the general theory about how initially interest groups worked. Okay. If we think about who joins a particular interest group, group membership is biased toward those at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum. If we think about who joins an interest group, it's people who have a particular interest. And so wealthy people have an interest in keeping their wealth, so they're more likely to join an interest group that's designed to try and protect their wealth. People who are worried about the environment, who have the time and money to invest in environmental issues, are going to do those types of things that they think are important to help the environment. So the people who are at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum have more time, more money, and oftentimes more expertise because they're more educated to give toward an interest group. So therefore, they're more likely to be asked to join because they can contribute paid dues and otherwise try to influence policy. And so when you have an interest and you have time and money and expertise and you're actually joining a particular interest group, this gives a person a higher sense of efficacy. And if you remember, political efficacy simply means that you believe that you have the ability to influence government. Efficacy means that you are able to influence. Okay, so if you have a higher sense of efficacy, that you have a higher sense of affecting government, then you're more likely to participate. Okay. So this doesn't fit in very well with the idea that the average citizen's interests are going to be represented and some bargain is going to be brought about in the public sphere. So in order to kind of get around this issue of dealing with who joins an interest group, additional theories came up to deal with how to get people to join an interest group if they don't have a lot of time, money, and expertise. How do you get the average person to join the NRA? How do you get the average person to join the Sierra Club? How do you get the average person to join Greenpeace? So you have to overcome what is called the free rider problem or the free rider dilemma. How do you attract members who will enjoy the collective benefits of clean air? How do you attract members who will join the collective benefits of more rights for the elderly, whether they join or not? I don't have to join an environmental interest group to benefit for the work that that interest group does. That's what a collective good is. A collective good is the type of good that exists out in the public sphere that I get to enjoy even though I don't actually pay for it. Okay? And so how do you get people to overcome the free rider problem? You've probably experienced the free rider problem when you're assigned group work in college. You've been in a group, you've been given an assignment, and you know that someone's not going to do their part, but they're going to get the grade everyone else gets because it's a group project. And you yourself don't want to get a bad grade, so you're willing to overcome the free rider in your group. So how do you get these individuals to try and participate? You have to offer what are called selective benefits. And selective benefits are those types of benefits that only members can enjoy. So the way you try to overcome the free rider dilemma is try to offer some sort of selective benefit. It's selective because only members get to select these types of benefits. And they come in a variety of types. There's informational, material, solidary, and purposive selective benefits. Okay. And the next slide is going to give you some examples of those. All right, these are some different benefits of group membership. So informational, for example, there's all kinds of things that would be beneficial to members through some information that they might get for joining. So certain groups, like if you are a doctor and you're enticed to join the American Medical Association, the AMA, you pay your dues, and you're likely to be able to attend some conferences. It's going to get you in touch with some professionals in your field. There might be some training programs. As a member of the AMA, you're going to get the journals associated with that particular organization. You might get some research help. The AMA is also a place where you can get help with some insurance for malpractice. If you're a teacher, you're going to be a teacher. There's not a lot of strong unions in the state of Texas, but you can join the Texas Education Association, the TEA, and they can provide legal help for you if you were to be sued, for example. These organizations like the American Bar Association, for example, provides professional codes about how lawyers should participate. If you're a union, the informational benefits that you get from joining the union is that they will collectively bargain on your behalf. So there's a lot of information that is available. In terms of material benefits, things that you can actually tangibly benefit from, there are certain travel packages. If you join AAA, you get a certain discount on particular things. There's insurance available through different groups that you join. You might get a discount on certain goods if you are a member of AAA. Then solidarity benefits are those types of things that help you on a personal level. They give you some sort of personal benefit that makes you feel better. So there's friendship, networking opportunities. And then there's a purposive benefit where they will be an advocate on behalf of you in government. So this is where they're going to be your advocate. They're going to represent you before the government, usually through their political action committee, their PAC. And they'll participate in public affairs on your behalf. So those are different ways to overcome the free rider problem. If we think about the AARP, this is the Association for the Advancement of Retired People. They are the largest interest group in the United States, and it started as an organization to help retired teachers afford life insurance. So again, it started as a material benefit, see, to provide insurance. But it has over 36 million members. And how do they get so many people to join? When you turn 50, they will just send you something in the mail and you just have to fill it out and turn it back in, and the dues are very low. But they provide these 4 different things. So for example, there's a magazine you get that provides all kinds of information about the issues dealing with senior citizenship, for example. There are material benefits, as I mentioned, insurance. In terms of solidarity benefits, they get you in touch with numerous local events that will connect you with other people who are part of the AARP. And of course, in terms of purposive, they're going to lobby on your behalf. The AARP is a very powerful interest group, and they have a lot to say, particularly about the issue of health care that's in front of Congress and the President today. All right. So again, by offering these different benefits, such as discount cards, insurance policies, trips, the AARP is one of the most, is an organization that's very powerful when it comes to lobbying Congress. All right. When it comes to interest groups, they have several different functions. All right. So you're going to want to pay attention to this slide. Not every interest group does every single function. And some interest groups do all these different functions, all right? So it depends on what the purpose of the interest group is. First and foremost, interest groups seek to protect the economic interest and seek government benefits on behalf of their membership, okay? Groups can and do promote the economic and self-interest of their members. And it's very easy to see how this works. The AARP protects the interest of senior citizens. They want to protect the government benefits of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Okay, and so this is one function that the interest group will do. Another function that the interest group does is to advance a social movement. In this way, it can be a very symbolic function. And so there's lots of ethnic cultural groups in the United States, such as the Italian American Foundation, the Polish American Congress, the NAACP, the National Organization of Women. These are all organizations that exist to advance a social movement and are symbolic in their nature. Other groups are more patriotic in their symbolic. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW, for example, or the Disabled American Veterans, the DAV. These are, again, they probably fulfill an economic interest, but they're also advancing a particular social movement. Some interest groups have an ideological purpose for them. Some groups may provide their members with ideologies and provide the rest of the society with views of what the liberal and conservative views are on particular issues. So, for example, the Americans for Democratic Action, the ADA, is an important liberal group, whereas the Americans for Constitutional Action, the ACA, are a rival conservative group. And the opinions of these particular groups may help Americans take some cues as to what they believe in on certain issues. So the ADA and the ACA, for example, will provide information, which is the next function, to help government respond to certain issues. So, for example, the ADA and the ACA are going to rate senators and representatives on a scale from 0 to 100. And a person who gets a strong score of 100 from the ADA and a 0 from the ACA is going to be a liberal. Okay, so the ADA, again, is a liberal organization. If you score 100 with them and a 0 from the ACA, that means you're the more liberal more liberal representative. The American Bar Association does this for judges. So when senators are trying to decide whether or not to support a particular judge for a federal appointment, the ADA and the ACA will rank judges based on their liberal conservative spectrum, and this provides information to help government respond to certain issues. Then there's an instrumental function that governments have that may not be economic. Okay, so most interest groups serve, again, as an instrument to try and achieve some goal, and sometimes these goals are not purely economic in nature. So, for example, I might join the peace movement or a peace organization because I want to push for peace. The peace movement will serve as an instrument to fulfill this goal. Another interesting case is the interest group politics, or another interesting case in interest groups is the March of Dimes. Originally, it was an instrument for those who wish to achieve a cure for the disease of polio. But polio has been eradicated. Okay, so now the March of Dimes has what does the March of Dimes do now? Well, they've changed their focus, and their challenge now is to battle birth defects. So you can see that the goals of various groups may change over time. And so, yes, these groups raise money, so they're economic in that nature, but their whole purpose isn't to represent the economic interests of its members. Their goal is something that's non-economic in nature, like responding to a health issue. All right, so those are the different functions. And again, an interest group might satisfy all those functions, or an interest group might only do a couple of those functions. So don't get functions and types of interest groups confused. All right, so these are the functions of interest groups. Interest groups may do one or more than one of these different functions, but now we're going to talk about different types. All right, so obviously economic interest groups are going to provide this economic function, but they also might do some of these other things. All right, so one type of interest group are business groups. All right, their goal is to help members make and keep money. Okay, so there's different types of economic interest groups. There's business groups. Okay, so for example, one of the largest and best known business groups in America is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Okay, the organization was founded in 1912, and so it's been around a long time. In the state of Texas, the oil lobbies are a particular big interest group, and they're referred to in your text as a trade association. Okay, then you have small business groups. The largest group representing small business is a National Federation of Independent Businesses. And these are just some other types of business groups. You have the trial lawyers of North Carolina. This particular group is in Canada, but it's an interest group that deals with the SPCA. Obviously, we have that in the United States to help animals. Okay, so that's one type of economic group. Another type of economic group are your labor groups. Okay, the largest labor union in America is the AFL-CIO, which is short for the American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations. It's an umbrella organization consisting of just over 100 separate union organizations, including plumbers, meat cutters, mine workers, teamsters. We don't hear a lot about unions in the state of Texas because we are a right-to-work state. Okay, so unions aren't very strong here. But if you go to the East Coast, New York City, if you're working in any type of labor, if you're a plumber, a construction worker, a dock worker, you belong to a union. Okay, there are over 13 million members of the AFL-CIO. Okay, and so union membership in America is decreasing. We have more white-collar workers. We have more skilled workers. The individuals feel more secure, and we don't see ourselves in the terms of labor versus management very much. And again, it's more of a regional issue. Okay. Here are some different economic interest groups in the United States, and you can see one of the biggest interest groups is the National Association of Realtors. This is their membership in terms of millions. Okay, and so you can see the different. Here are some unions. Okay, so the communication workers, United Parcel Workers, the Carpenters and Joiners Union, and these are all part of the AFL-CIO. Okay, I'm sorry, this isn't membership. This is how much money they gave to candidates. All right, so you can see realtors give a lot of money to candidates for elections. Again, here are some additional pictures of some unions, and I have a graph here to show you union membership in the United States relative to other countries in the West. So you can see in Denmark, the percentage of individuals working in a union is 87.5, and here we have the United States. Only France has a smaller group in terms of unions. All right, so you can see where many European countries are heavily unionized relative to the United States. All right, some additional economic interest groups are some professional associations. I mentioned the AMA and the ABA. This is American Bar Association. So if you're a professional, if you become a lawyer, you're probably going to join the ABA, and if you're going to be a doctor, you're probably going to join the AMA. As a professional, as an academic, I'm a member of the American Political Science Association. So professional associations, you pay dues and you get some benefits. Okay. If you're going to be a teacher, the NEA or the AFT are both educational associations that are beneficial to teachers. You can get some insurance through them in terms of, I don't want to call it malpractice, but in case you get sued for something that happens while you're teaching. And then, of course, farm or agricultural interests are important in the state of Texas. So these are all examples of educational organizations, or economic interest groups. Another type of interest group is what is called a public interest or a citizen activist group. And these groups generally have a single issue, they're an advocacy group, or they might be an ideological group. Okay. And so a public interest group is one that seeks some sort of collective good so that the rest of us can hopefully enjoy. Okay. A cause or single interest group is driven by one particular issue, like the abortion issue. An advocacy group is a group that is going to act on behalf of someone else, like the NAACP. And the ideological group, again, is like the conservative group or the Democratic group that I talked about earlier. So let me just give you some examples of these different types of citizen, activist, and public interest groups. And so, of course, environmentalists are very concerned about the environment, and these are the kinds of things that they might do in order to try to influence public policy. And they dressed in various ways, as the comment says, for former Utah Governor Michael O. Levitt's confirmation hearing as the administrator of the EPA. They did not want this gentleman during the Bush administration to be the administrator of the EPA because they felt he wasn't that friendly to the environment. But even though they protested and dressed up like this, he was confirmed and became Secretary of Health and Human Services. Okay. Religious interest group is a type of interest group that is probably more of your advocacy group, and this is the Christian Coalition. And so the Christian Coalition, for example, will distribute guides to help try to influence elections. And so they're going to print up a guide, this is from the 2004, list the particular issue and tell how George Bush viewed that particular issue and how John Kerry viewed that issue. And they're trying to promote, obviously, George Bush here in order to and provide some voting cues for people who might be attracted to the Christian Coalition. Your civil rights group, again, this is an advocacy, all the different groups that make up the civil rights movement. And again, this is a 1963 March on Washington. It's an aerial view, so you can see exactly how crowded the mall was in Washington, D.C. And this is the Jefferson Memorial, if you've been to Washington, D.C. All this has been built up since then. This is over 50 years ago, so you can kind of see a lot of changes have been taking place in Washington since then. A single interest group, the environment is one example. Again, abortion issue is another example. Okay. So how do some of these environmental groups do business? So for example, Greenpeace has 250,000 members. If you've watched the movie Armageddon with Bruce Willis, it's on TV a lot. At the very beginning of the movie, he's golfing off of his deck of his oil well out in the ocean, and the boat he's trying to hit is Greenpeace. Okay, and so they have a boat that they try to put in the middle of situations to protest what's going on. So their issues deal with global warming, genetically engineered food. This is also referred to as genetically modified food. So if you hear GMO, that's genetically modified organisms, the dealing with oceans and pollutants and nuclear weapons. And so these are the kinds of things that they do. They tend to do a lot of grassroots activity, a lot of media, but you don't see them paying a lobbyist to go into Washington, D.C. The National Resource Defense Council does lobby. They do litigate. They have scientists on their staff to provide witness testimony in Congress. And again, the Sierra Club, as I mentioned before, and then there's the Wilderness Society. There's a lot of other groups that you might see in the mail. You get these guys flyers in the mail all the time, and if you send them money, you'll get all kinds of stuff in return, including perhaps a satchel or a book bag or labels for return mail. That's how they do a lot of their business. Okay, let's take a break there, and we'll come back and talk more about how these different interest groups go about lobbying Congress.